Hi, friends, and welcome back to another episode of the I Owe It to Myself podcast as we continue our bookish fun. I just got done reading chapters 29 through 54 of The Ashes and the Star-Cursed King, and there's a ton that happens, so I don't want to ramble too long in this upfront, but one of the things that I do want to say is that I have started committing to doing posts in regards to my schedule so that way people will know what it is that I'm reading and when those episodes will be posted. I've been doing this read-along series for practically the entire time of this podcast so far. We've put out over 30 episodes, and I have just been kind of banking on the fact that people would listen to the episodes if they either already had read the book or if they have read at least what it is that I was talking about in each of the episodes. And to me, it still felt like a way to do a read-along, yet it can't really, in my opinion, be considered a true read-along because people can't plan for that. They can't plan their reading around not knowing what it is that I will be talking about, because on the off chance that they don't read enough, then they would get spoilers in my episodes, and that isn't great. So it's funny how it's the smallest of things that you can shift, but that can make the biggest of impacts. And this is one of those things where I'm sure many people are like, duh, like you should have been doing that from the beginning. But one of the things that I had talked about for a very long time is that I have wanted to just record when I wanted to record, and I wanted it to feel very natural. But what I have very quickly realized is, as much as I really like that, I also am very much a person who appreciates a plan, or at least having some understanding of what to expect. And if I really want this to be a true read-along style podcast, I have to give people the lay of the land and know what it is we're going to be reading and talking about in advance. So schedules is something that I'm going to start committing to and trying to do more of, which means that yes, I do have to plan my reading. It means that my episodes are going to have to be the chapters that I say that they're going to be, which means that sometimes I'm going to have to read more than I want to, and sometimes I'm going to have to stop, even though I want to continue reading, just to make sure that I'm not leaving anything out or adding anything in that isn't about the chapters that I have recorded for. Now, all of that to say, so much has happened in these chapters from chapter 29 through 54. It's unbelievable. And when I was reading it, I will admit that I knew that I had to get through chapter 54 because it is a part of a scheduled post that is going to be going out here soon. And part of me just wanted to stop. Like, I wanted to just share and talk and record my thoughts. And that's exactly the type of feeling that I didn't want to fight against when I was doing this podcast. I wanted to keep it very organic and natural, but also part of me was like, this is what your plan was. This is what you were trying to commit to, and you just need to keep going. And I will actually say that the part at which I have stopped is actually really nice. Like, we have gone through so much stuff, but we're right at the point before everything really, really kicks off, which is the beginning of the end of this book. And so I'm actually very happy with where this netted out. All of that to say, I want to go ahead and dive in because I don't want this episode to be any longer than it has to be. The main thing that I want to do for this episode is I want to start talking about the characters rather than just my thoughts in order of how they happened in this story. I feel like I've had a little bit more success talking about each of the characters and the way that I'm feeling about them and their journey than sharing my thoughts as I go through the story. And I think that will also help with me not recapping the story, which if you're here and you're listening to this, you've already read it, so you don't need me to recap it for you. That all said, the person that I want to start with is actually the one that I think I have the most thoughts about at this time, and that's Mish. I know I've said her name different times in past episodes. I don't even know if I'm saying it right, but in the book, Rain, when he is calling her by like a nickname, it's Mish, M-I-S-H, which makes me feel like when we see her full name with an E on the end, that maybe it's Mishay, but I'm going to call her by her nickname, which I read it as Mish. The first immediate thought that I have, and I might have mentioned this in the past, but I will touch on it now, of course, which is that she is annoying to me. And the reason why I'm being so blunt about it is because to me, there's really no way that she wouldn't be. Anybody reading this book, I am pretty confident, will have had the thought or has the thought that she is an annoying character. The thing that causes me to comment on it is that I am pretty confident that she is the main character in the next duet of books. And what I don't understand is why would they make her so continuously obnoxious and then have her be the main character of the next set of books? Because why would you want to read from her perspective? The only thing that I can think of is that there is so much below the surface of what we see of her that the Mish that we're going to get in her books is going to be vastly different. And the way that her personality comes across to Araya and to Rain when we're reading these books from their perspective and seeing her from their eyes, it's going to be very different when you're seeing it from Mish's perspective. That's the only thing that I can think is going to happen, because otherwise it just doesn't make any sense. I mean, truly, every single time that she comes up, there's some comment about how she doesn't stop talking, or how she's like loud and obnoxious, or like just so unrefined and like flighty. And I'm not saying that there's anything wrong with that, but every single time that she's brought up, there's some version of that is happening until these pages in this book that we got to, which is why I think that in her books, she will have to be a little bit more of an evolved version of herself. And so that is the part that I want to talk about right now, which is that I understand that we are seeing more of her now because of that lead-in. The author is intending for you to start to get this understanding that she is way more of a complex character than you think that she is. Obviously, for me, and based on what I just said, it doesn't take away from the fact that she is teed up and continuously referenced as like an annoyance and kind of a pain, but yet obviously there's a great loyalty that she has to Rain, and that Rain has to her, and therefore that Araya has to her, and they have this little family unit together for many reasons. But what we are starting to see in this book is those layers below. In the first book, they talked about how she was fighting in the trials and the tournament and how she used her magic and all of this stuff. You already knew that there was layers to her and things about her that were far greater than what you saw. You already knew that this like annoyance and this approach of her being talked about in this way of being, again, like annoying and flighty and whatever, was just one piece of her. So what I'm saying now is not new, but I think because now you're starting to see so much more of it, and because of that, it's starting to get more real, and that reminder is ever present that she's the main character in the next set of books. It's starting to frustrate me that that's the majority of what we still see of her. What I want to say in regard to the deeper side of her is that it could be possible that the reason why she tends to be so bubbly or cheery and her personality is very much the way that it is because the trauma around her turning was so great and so life-altering that she will do anything that she can not to go back there. And that means that instead of letting that darkness consume her and letting her become this person that is so jaded and so cold and like a fierce warrior, because what happened to her, what we come to find out in this book of what happened to her, could have easily gone the other way. There is something about her maybe that was already in her all along, or about what happened after she turned, that she has chosen to grasp onto and to keep bubbly and positive, and that is what she presents with. If I had to guess, I would say that when we get into her books, that there is going to be this relationship that she comes across where it starts to break a lot of that down, and it starts to pull the real Mish out and bring her to be more present every day, and not just this mask of like happiness and flightiness and what have you. I am interested to see if that actually happens, and to see how this like bubbliness with the reality of who she is actually meshes together. And what I mean by that is because not only was her turning very traumatic, but what we still don't have an understanding of is why she has so many scars on her arms. And what I want to clarify about that is we know why they're there. They're there because she has been trying to use the magic of a god that, from what I understand, like doesn't claim her. And she has so desperately tried to do that she has used her own blood in some form or fashion many, many times to try to keep this connection with him or get power from him, or whatever the case may be. I don't fully understand it because it hasn't really been talked about that much. So not only do we have the way in which she turned and how she was left for dead and how she was violated and just this massive trauma. But then you have these behaviors where it isn't flighty, it isn't bubbly. She has been doing self-harm for a very long time for a purpose that we still don't fully understand. That is the Mish that I'm very interested to see. I would almost bet that when we get to her books and see her inner monologue, that it is going to be vastly different from what we see on the outside. And if it's not, I don't honestly know if I would be disappointed, but I just feel strongly that there is at least a good portion of the way that she fronts to everyone in her life that's fake. That's just a mask for everything that she's thinking and feeling on the inside. And I think her books are going to be a huge shift in the way that you see her. And I think that is by design. I think what also adds to that is just this constant reminder that when she picks up weapons and is fighting alongside Oriah in some of the scenes that we see, we're reminded how brutal she is. She is capable and she's strong. And so I think that will just add to the version of her that we get in her duet of books. The last thing that I do want to say about this situation though, and I honestly am almost ashamed to admit it, but when we see Oriah and Mish talking when they're at the wedding celebration for Vale and his wife, and the Shadowborn prince is there and he sees Mish and Mish sees him, and at first, because we're in Oriah's point of view at the time that this happens, when she says like, oh, you're getting attention, and she sees him, there's a part of me that knows immediately, it's immediately obvious that they have a past. But I didn't necessarily read her reaction fully as panic. Let me clarify. I did read it as panic, but not necessarily as traumatic panic. I just thought that was her being very awkward and very like out of place, and that she knows this person and that they have a past and now he's in front of her and that he was going to be the love interest for her in her duet of books. We, come to find out that is so not the case, and that he's the one that violated her and turned her and left her to die. So her reaction, now we know, was very viscerally traumatic, and it was very overwhelming for her because she didn't remember the face of the person who did it. But in that moment, she knew that it was him. And she talks about that with Rain. And so when I realized that, I was just like, man, this is a moment where I wish that my brain wasn't always jumping ahead to try to connect the dots or wasn't always making these assumptions. On one hand, it's kind of nice because then when I'm proven wrong, it is nice to know that I can still be surprised and that I'm not so spot on with things, that it's predictable. I do enjoy that piece of it, but this was one of those things that I was like, damn, the reality of what that prince is to Mish, and again, how he just so brutally violated her. I don't want that for her. It doesn't matter if I like her character or not. That's terrible. And so there was a moment where I was like, okay, that really sucks. And that is a twist that I wish didn't happen. But when I tell you that I was very glad to see the way in which she killed him, how healing that I hope that ends up being for her. I know that she is still very much processing it, because one of the last things that happens for Mish in the set of chapters that I'm talking about in this episode is that her and Rain have a conversation finally, and she tells him everything. She talks about how she knows it was wrong, and regardless of everything, she knows that what he is doing is like the end all be all, that it has to be done for the sake of change. And he was willing to even give up Oriah to do it. And that for her to sacrifice that politically by killing him and creating potential strife with him amongst these other vampires, it was just not smart. She's just going on and on about how she understands the consequences of her actions. But the only thing that Rain is saying, and that he wants her to fully hear him say, is I don't care. I would have killed him, but I'm so glad that you got to do it. This trumps all of that, and it always will. There is nothing that will ever be more important than getting justice in the form of vengeance for something like that, because that is the worst of the worst that could have happened. Your story was not okay, and you have been shouldering it, and now you had this person come into what is supposed to be a safe place for you, and that's not okay either, right? He's trying to get her to understand where he's at. And what I find interesting about that is she isn't wrong in regard to the political side of it, and her thought process makes sense. But there is something about it that for the first time, you almost feel like her and Rain are really far apart. There are so many times where they have interactions and conversations where it's almost like they're in lockstep without having to say too much. They can just read each other's actions and understand each other. But that was one conversation where I was like, how can she be so far apart from where he is? Why is she seeing him so differently? But I think what I have to remember is that he was in the tournament for a really long time. She has not had a lot of time with him. They spent so much time together all the way up until that tournament. And then when she was injured and left, like, she saw them for a little bit, during it. And then she came, a little bit after. And then now with her having helped take care of Oriah, but like, she hasn't really been around him as regularly as she was before the tournament in probably many, many, many months. Not that that is enough time for when two people are as close as they are to change things, but so much has shifted on such a huge scale that I guess to some degree it does make sense that they're not totally in lockstep. But even as I'm trying to make sense of it now and talk about it, there still is just something about her not realizing that he would just fully, unapologetically have her back that just feels off, and it feels a little bit heartbreaking. But ultimately, you're led to believe that they've had their moment, they've had their conversation, they've figured it out, and they're on the same page, and like, they've moved on. But I think in learning about Mish along this series of interactions and conversations that she's had and the way that she's interacted with Rain, there really is just so much that we still don't see about her. And as much as she isn't at the top of my list of favorite characters coming out of this story, there is a bit of an intrigue there in regard to the mystery of it all. So now I want to go ahead and I want to talk about Oriah, because just last episode, which I was just finishing editing today, so it was actually really nice to come in and then read this set of chapters. Everything that I was wanting out of her, all of my frustrations that I was talking about in episode 1 happened so quickly in this set of chapters. And I was really thankful for that. Like, yes, it took us a couple of chapters to get there, but I can't tell you how vindicated I felt when I was reading these pages, when Oriah was getting to the point of being like, I hate that I want to hate Rain. I hate what he did to Vincent. I hate that we're here and how we got here. I hate that I hate him, but I hate that I hate him, and I know that I don't hate him at all. Like, she goes through this monologue, and there's many different moments where she, is talking to him. She has her inner monologue, whatever, where she's talking about this, but she gets to this point where she's just like, I don't care anymore. Like, I'm tired of it. I'm tired of being tired. And I just know that while there's so much uncertainty in my life, the one thing that remains true is how I feel about him. That is real. And I just have to embrace it. Like, I have to cling on to what it is that I know to be true. And what I know to be true is that I care about this man. And I just have to cling on to it. And I have to believe him when he says that he cares about me, because what else do I have if I don't believe him? And again, it was, a couple of chapters into this where, and not even just the first interaction that her and Rain had in the set of chapters, it took a few, but where finally I was just like, thank God. Like, she just really had, and it was funny because in her monologue, I feel like she was saying a lot of what I was saying. Like, she was just talking about how it was right in front of her face, and she just knew what she was pushing against and what she was fighting, and on and on and on. And it was more vindicating to see it be quite closely related to what I was saying that I felt like she was doing, than for it to just be like a much simpler version of that. And so as much as I've been frustrated with her because of how layered she is and nuanced of a character that she can be, especially when it comes to her emotions, I am glad for the way that it panned out. Because for me, at least specifically, and where my head was at and the thought process that I was having with her, it was truly vindication when she was just like, what am I doing? Why am I fighting this? Yada, yada, yada. And she just finally accepts what's right in front of her face. And I so appreciated the way in which all of that went down. And it was great because, again, it happened fairly early on in this set of chapters. So I could just be like, great, her head is clear. She knows what is in front of her. She knows what she has to set out to do now. Now let's just go freaking do it. And what was really great about that is I don't want to say that these first couple of chapters from chapter 19 on for the first few was like a slow build, because there was a lot of movement. Things have continued to happen, right? Mish and Oriah are together. Rain is back in the main city. They have a couple of back and forths as they're trying to train and all this stuff. Then they go into the city. And then once they're there, like, things just continue to move. They don't really stop. So I don't want to say that the beginning portions of leading up to this point when she has this revelation are like slow. It's all necessary, and it all matters to even get us to this point of the realization that she's about to have. But I am just glad that I didn't have to wait until like the end of the book for her to get her head out of her butt. So that filled me with a lot of joy. And what I've gotten out of her since that point is just power and mostly confidence. There is still a little bit of emotional walls that are up, and she still does have this hesitation to be vulnerable, but in her inner monologue, you are seeing her more and more just acknowledge that and starting to work through how to address that and deal with that in conversations with Rain. And I think I just comment on it because it puts you in a place to feel confident that they will figure it out, right? Like they have an understanding with each other, and she may not be the best when it comes to her emotions and how she relates to other people all the time. But I think even Rain, as I say that, I smile because I think even Rain talks about how she can be like socially awkward and stuff. So regardless of her ability to really be like in touch with people or her feelings, she has figured out a way to be able to communicate with him, and they have an understanding. And I think that that's just going to only grow as we continue to get through this book. And that's really the main thing that I wanted to say about Oriah. Like, I think me being so frustrated with her, and then in the first episode, and then coming into this second, and pretty quickly into this recording, her figuring it out, it was just such a nice relief, and it was such a nice change. And I was like, thank God. Like, we have so much work to do. I just need you to get over this piece of it, despite being completely right and validated in her feelings. She has every reason to feel the way that she has, but also at the same time, it's like you're just fighting yourself, and she caught up with that. So that is really great to see. The only other thing I really want to talk about, I guess, is just kind of the evolution of what has happened. I have really appreciated the pace. A ton has gone down in this roughly third of the book, and we see more of Vale and his wife, which has been really interesting. There's even a moment in one of Rain's chapters where he's walking with Vale's wife and they have a conversation, and I don't feel like it puts you in a place to get to know her better. If anything, when I think back to the version of her that I was introduced to in the novella to who it is that I'm seeing now, I almost feel like they're not the same character, if that makes sense, because we saw her in her human form in the novella, and then she was changed at the end of the novella. And so now in this book, like, they talk about her being a turned vampire and all of that stuff, because there's a lot of hesitation of like, why is his wife turned, and like, why did he do this and whatever. And normally why vampires do that, it's very nefarious and it's not good. And Rain has his own bias because of his own experience and Mish's experience. So there's a lot of hesitation there, and they don't believe that it's love and all of that kind of stuff, understandably so. But even when he talks to her, they really are emphasizing the fact that like she can't really speak their language that well. But when he's having a dialogue with her, he's able to speak her original language to a degree. But it just feels like a different character than the woman that we saw in the novella. However, there are moments where she is very bold, and she, like, when they talked about the whole wedding thing, and she was like, we're doing this. Like, if this is to the benefit of this kingdom, we're having this wedding party or whatever. And she is just very like blunt and very not afraid. And that does track with who she was in the novella, because she was willing to go to a vampire in the first place to be like, hey, I need you to help me with this thing. And just was very like straightforward and honest about what she wanted and what she needed. And so I see some parallels in that way, but I guess I didn't expect her to feel as foreign as she did in this book compared to who I saw in the novella. So that's just a small comment that I wanted to make. But my overall point before I tangented was that I'm glad that we got more of them together. And what I am glad about is that now, before we are going into this battle, we know that Vale is loyal to Rain. when Rain was in his bag of being upset and knowing that he had some kind of leak or traitor, and he was telling Oriah this, and he says it has to be Vale, because he was going through the list of like, well, these people, you know, I've known them for a long time and they helped me in Mish and like whatever. He's going through his list. He's like, it can't be anybody but Vale in terms of like inner circle people. Of course, we end up figuring out that it wasn't Vale at all. But even when Rain said it, I was just like, there's no way. There's no way that it would be him that would be the one to come and cause problems. However, I didn't want to rule it out because I was like, well, that would definitely be a twist that I wouldn't be expecting or that anybody wouldn't see, is that he comes back to try to help after all these years, even though he wants nothing to do with any of these people or this war. And then, of course, be the one to had some ulterior motive. It could very well have been a plausible storyline, but it just felt wrong from the minute that I read Rain when he was saying like it's got to be Vale. And so when you obviously realize that it wasn't, and they have this moment of him and Vale talking, and Vale's like, look, like, I understand your hesitations about me and my wife, but this is the real deal, and clearly like you have that of your own, and like no matter what happens, like I just need to know that she's going to be protected regardless of like who's ruling or what happens to me. And Rain is like, of course, you know, without a doubt she will be. And so it's nice that we're getting to this point where who you hoped was going to be allies or who kind of came into the picture as allies has stayed that way. I'm not too surprised by the fact that one of, you know, the people that was kind of around in Rain's circle ended up being a traitor. It was bound to happen in some ways, because as much as Septimus is very sneaky and very cunning, there's always been this feeling that he just wouldn't quite do it all alone. And so it makes sense that there would be somebody else involved. And so I want to pivot to Septimus for a minute. There are moments when he's talking to Oriah throughout all of the books where you just almost feel like you can trust him. You almost feel like you can believe him. And then, of course, in this book, he totally screws them over. And we haven't gotten back to the point of meeting back up with him again since all hell broke loose, and both Oriah and Rain have kicked major ass. And, you know, now are coming back with all these with this big army. I just don't know how he makes up for it. And again, I said this in episode 1, I'm pretty confident that he is the main character in the last set of books of this whole entire Crowns of Nyaxia series. And I could be very wrong about that. But if it's him, I'm just like, what is his end game here? How does he get out of this? How is he not ultimately the bad guy? Unless it's like prequels that we see and he doesn't make it out of this, and so it's books about him before this time. I don't know, because we also get a little bit more out of Septimus in these chapters that I've read so far. He tells Oriah this tale of, you know, his family, and it ends up being about his brother, how he was like the one that was supposed to like save the Bloodborne kingdom, and he ended up dying. Nyaxia just killed him and was just cruel. And you have this moment when I was reading that, I had this moment of like, well, if you have your own set of books and if your brother has died, maybe you're the one who ends up getting rid of this curse, but you just can't see it. You can't see through your own grief, your own doubt, your own upbringing of your parents probably saying that, you know, the son who was going to save all is gone, or like whatever the case may be. And so he's just so bitter and cold and cunning, but I think that ultimately he is going to be the one to save them somehow. I don't think he's going to even realize, unless that's what he is trying to do this entire time and he feels like he can actually do it and that's his end game. But there's just something I feel like where his self-doubt is blinding to him that he doesn't even realize what he's capable of. But on the other hand, he's so hard to read that it could almost be that he knows exactly what he's capable of, and he is doing exactly what I was just talking about, which is trying to break this curse, but he's just doing it from a way of like, at all costs. It doesn't matter who gets sacrificed. I'm going to do this at all costs because our family's sacrificed too much. I don't know. He's hard for me to read, and there's something about him, and it's very interesting when you read about the interactions, because from Oriah's perspective, every time she interacts with him, like I was saying at the beginning of this little part about him, he comes across where you're kind of like, maybe you could be an ally, maybe you could be someone helpful, maybe you're not that bad after all. but there's just such a slyness and a cunningness that then you go back to hating him, just like Oriah does. It's a very interesting character. And the way that he's written it stands out very much so in my mind. And so I think that's the last thing that I want to say about all of this is I feel like we're getting a lot about a bunch of different characters in this set of chapters alone, and I appreciate that. I feel like we're really cooking with gas. Like, things picked up, stuff is happening with the main story, stuff is happening with a lot of individual characters, loyalties are being tested, like the story is really, really flowing. And so this last third of the book, I hope, is just as juicy and just as intense as the sections that I've just read, and that we really cruise through it, because they're going to war. They're going to take their home back, and I think it's going to be absolute chaos. But just everything that I've seen in these chapters of Oriah getting out of her own way, stepping into her power, going to save Rain, just absolutely kicking ass and taking names, the passion between Oriah and Rain, like, holy moly. The fact that we have had several different like intimate moments or love scenes span across several chapters is wild to me. Like, that, talk about stretching stuff out, like, that has just been crazy. I just feel like we're really, really cooking in this section of the story. And with this book, it's like things are finally moving and it's all happening at one time. And so it's making for a much more enjoyable read. And with that, I want to make my last point, which is that I really am just noticing that as much as Carissa's writing style is very different from what I feel like I have been liking or normally gravitate towards, her ability to really write these very different characters has just become very obvious to me as I've been talking and sharing my thoughts in this moment and talking about Mish and then Oriah and then Septimus. Like, I just for the first time really had this clear thought of like, wow, these are all very distinct, very different characters. And while both Mish and Septimus have a lot of mystery around them, they're also different. And you have to remember that they're all coming from the same author. And so there is something about that I have to tip my cap to. It's not that Oriah and Rain feel similar, but there is a lot of things that can be kind of symbiotic between them and the way that they are and just their mood and how they present and whatever. Whereas Mish is completely off the walls with, again, just her loudness and her personality. And then Septimus is completely cunning and very mysterious. And it's all coming from the same brain. And so, you know, definitely hats off to Carissa for that. It just really seeing the differences and understanding how unique these characters are. It's a cool realization I have, and it makes a lot of sense because, again, if Mish is the main character for the second set of books and then Septimus is the main character for the third set of books, it kind of makes sense that they had to be very distinct and you had to pay attention to them. Like, again, with Vale and his wife, even though we got the novella, they're just there. Like, there's not a lot about them that's super surprising. There's not a lot about them that really like stands out in any way. But when you are reading off of the page when people are interacting with Mish, and when you're reading off the page when people are interacting with Septimus, it is just so in your face. Like, you cannot ignore them as characters. You don't just brush past them or like glance over them in any shape, way, or form. And I'm not saying that you do with Vale, but it's just very easy for him to kind of be along for the ride. And so maybe that's why these others stand out as much as they do, because they're going to have this part to play when it comes to these other books in the Crowns of Nyaxia overall, like, world and series. But I do just want to comment that I really am recognizing the differences there. And so, yeah, hats off for that and their character development and how much they stand out as individual characters. But yeah, really with this just set of chapters, so much has happened. A lot of action, and I've really appreciated that. The pace at which things have happened, the intensity with which things have happened. Certain things haven't been belabored too long, like when Oriah and Rain were back in the castle and went to go try to save everybody. There was many moments where I was like, oh my God, someone's going to get snatched up, or they're going to get stranded in this castle, or that like it's going to go right into this main battle. But the fact that they just got the fuck out of there and had a moment to like regroup, and of all places, they went to go to where Jasmine is and like have a reprieve and get everything together before they go back into battle. Like, I can't tell you how relieved I was. And maybe that's just me being jaded when it comes to having read stuff from like SJM or Rebecca Yarros, of how there never really seems to be a reprieve in anything. But that was it was nice to be like, man, they just get to have a moment. And even here, like I could just picture it. I could picture their relief of finally getting there and having moments with all these different people, like when Rain and Vale had the conversation and when Mish and Rain had their conversation. Like, it just feels like everything is really falling into place for them to go into this battle and kick ass and take names. I really don't know what's going to come out of the other side of that. I don't know if everybody going in is going to make it out. I think that it's going to be very, very intense, and where we end, because we've read through chapter 54, where that ends is like they're literally on their way. They are going into battle as we speak. And so while it was the perfect time, it ends at the perfect scene with Rain and Oriah together and just kind of reflecting in this tent as they're taking this break on their journey back into the main city to go take back their kingdom. It gives you too, as a reader, a minute to pause and just like get it together and kind of shake out the jitters and just know we're going to go into this last roughly third of the book and it's going to be big time. So yeah, a lot has happened. This was a really good read. Again, I had moments where I wanted to almost stop before I got through chapter 54 because I felt like I had a lot to say and so much had happened, but I'm really glad that I read through where I did. I think it ended up being a really great stopping point. I think that this book so far has been the best of what I've read of these. And while I'm not going to go right into the second set of books for this overall Crowns of Nyaxia series, I do think that I will get to them at some point. I'm going to take a bit of a break because we have other stuff that we need to get through, especially with the ACOTAR reread coming up. And if I'm going to read anything in parallel to that ACOTAR reread, I mentioned this in other episodes, but I think I want to do a completely different book and not necessarily stay in the fantasy realm. But I'm interested to see how things come to light with other Carissa Broadbent books and how I feel about those, because I know that these haven't been my favorite the entire time and I've had my moments with them. And so I'm interested to see if and when I pick them up, how I feel about them, because I do think that I'm interested enough to read the next two duets that she has. And I know that she doesn't even have all of the books out for the third duet yet. So I'm interested to see what comes of it, but I think that there's other stuff I want to tackle in the meantime. And I feel really okay about rounding out these three books, the two for the duet and the one novella, and kind of parking it for a minute and exploring other things. But I'm glad with where this book is, and I'm glad with how I feel about it and just the pace of everything that has happened. So a lot has gone on. I have no doubt that this last portion of the book is going to be just as intense and filled with plenty of twists and turns. So we shall see what happens. But as always, I appreciate you all for listening to this episode and reading along with me. Please share your thoughts in the comments of YouTube of how you're feeling about the characters or the story. Where is your head at with everything? Is there characters that you really like? Are any of them annoying you or frustrating you? I've obviously shared plenty of thoughts about how I feel about them, so would love to hear that from you as well. And as always, stay connected with all of my social channels. We have an Instagram and a Threads account, as well as a TikTok account where I post schedules as well as announcements that the episodes are live on YouTube. So definitely stay connected with us there. But I thank you again for being here. This has been fun. I hope that you continue to listen along, and I look forward to when we get to release this third episode and round out this book. So until next time, friends.